Lord Jesus, I do just ask that you would turn our eyes to you. God, I pray for your Spirit to be here this evening, to fill each one of us, that our minds could be clear, that we would see you in your true beauty, in the love that is unfailing that you have for us, with your deep compassion, with your longing to forgive, and the way you are so patient and kind, and the way you work with us. God, just draw our hearts to you. We love you and we praise you tonight. Amen.
Good evening. Glad everybody could be here tonight. Interestingly enough, as events have turned out, Sean forgot his power cord for his computer. He does have a little bit of power, but in the meantime, I guess I can just talk about him until the power cord gets here. But Sean and I went to school and academy together at Bass Academy in Mississippi. That's where I first met him. His father wore many hats at the school there, including principal, Bible teacher, and class sponsor, and just friend to the young people there. And my experience with Sean was honestly kind of brief, because my first year at Bass Academy was his senior year. So I did get to know his brother, his younger brother, a little bit better. One thing you always wonder when you are going through school and asking those questions of life is, where am I going to be, and then where are my friends going to be, and where do they end up in life? And it's always good to know that some people have really connected with God, and that God has been working in their lives and growing them, developing their mind and their understanding of Him. And I truly believe that God has been doing that with Sean. And the message that he has for you tonight is one of hope and understanding of who we are and what life is all about. So without further ado, I'll introduce to you Sean Pitman.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and sorry about my power cord. So worried about everything else, that everything be perfect here. And you guys even put in a new sound system cable. Oh, here it is. So that I could actually have my laptop up front. You talked just long enough, yeah. You didn't even tell any good stories. So, yeah, my brother is even in Darren's wedding. So we go back a little bit. And and he didn't say, I was a PK squared, basically. My dad's a pastor and a principal. It was terrible, right? Usually PKs, they end up, oh, you're a PK, oh my goodness. The world is coming to an end. And but somehow we managed to survive. I think partly because my father is an unusual pastor. And he did a lot of things that normal pastors, I guess, wouldn't do with their kids growing up. So he said, look, I've done it all. Smoking, drinking, girls, whatever you want to know, just tell me, I'll tell you all about it. So, and he says, if you want to smoke, I'll go buy you the cigarettes. It's just I don't want you hiding it from me, right? I want to be there when you fall down and help you get back up. And that's I was like, really? I never took him up on that, though. So go buy smoke in front of your own father, who's a pastor and a principal. Yeah, good, right. So anyway. So then I went off into the Army to pay for medical school, and called my dad up. I said, what do you think? He was a chaplain in the Air Force. He's like, do it. Yeah, go for it. And my mom's like, I don't think so. And he's like, no, you'll love it. You'll have a great time. And so I went ahead and went into the Army. First time outside of the Adventist ghetto, though. And so then they were asking me, the officers I work with and the medics and everybody else, they're like, how in the world can you be a rational Christian and a scientist, claim you're interested in medicine and science and all these things? Because that Bible stuff is all fairy tale. Darwin disproved it a long time ago, and it's just a bunch of nonsense. So how in the world can you be an Adventist and a Christian and believe in the Bible that's anything more than a moral fable? And I was like, I don't know. So I'll have to look into that. And I was kind of nervous because I was like, I might actually have to leave the church over this because I didn't really understand how in the world. And I had questions from childhood that nobody could answer for me, not my father, not the teachers in school, and I went all the way through Adventist schools, through medical school. And nobody, not even in Loma Linda Medical School, could answer my questions, at least to my satisfaction, on why Darwinism wasn't true, why it didn't work. And because it seemed like it did work. There's antibiotic resistance, and there's different kinds of dogs and cats, and there's all kinds of different kinds of roses. You can evolve from the same rose. You can get a red rose and turn it into a pink rose or a yellow rose or a black rose or a blue rose, through random mutation, natural selection, right? Or at least some kind of selection. And so how in the world, where's the limit to the change, if there are any limits? And I had no idea. And so I was kind of nervous. I was like, what if there aren't any limits and Darwin was right? Then maybe the Bible is a bunch of fairy tales, and maybe I'll have to leave the church over this, and it'll really be upsetting to my parents and my friends and family and stuff. But, I was like, I got to look into this because I got to figure it out. And so as I was looking into it, I started getting excited because I started with genetics because that's where my background was, and it started to make sense to me. And so then I started sharing it with my Army buddies, and they were shocked. They're like, we never heard anything like this before in our lives. You have to put this on the internet. I was like, what's the internet? And back then, and they're like, and you have to make a web page. And I was like, how do I do that? So they helped me do all this and put it out there, and that's how all this started. And so that's part of what I'm going to share with you tonight is kind of the neat things that convinced me and why I'm still here, basically. So the wonders of design, today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about design, how you can detect design in nature, in biology, and living things. And then Sabbath afternoon, 2 o'clock, then it's more about the age of at least life on Earth and how you can be rational about that as well. Is it really millions and billions of years old, or is it recent, like the Bible seems to claim? So that's what we're going to get into. So it turns out, for better or worse, depending on who you are, that the universe is written in the language of mathematics. It's all based on numbers. And there's some favorite numbers, it seems like, that God has that are present throughout the universe. And what's interesting about these numbers is that they're the same type of numbers that SETI scientists are looking for to detect intelligent life beyond our own. So here's Seth Sostak. He's the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, and this is what he says that they are looking for. He says, look, perhaps the extraterrestrials will preface their message, their radio signal message, with a string of prime numbers, or maybe the first 50 terms of the ever-popular Fibonacci series. Well, there's no doubt that such mathematical tags would convey intelligence. So here's a response from some other biologists and authors. They said, then why doesn't the message sequence in the DNA molecule constitute prima facie evidence for an intelligent source? After all, DNA information is not just analogous to a message sequence like the Morse code. It is such a message sequence. So how is this explained? Why does it work for radio signals but not for DNA? And also this Fibonacci series is interesting because it's everywhere. The Fibonacci series, if you don't know, it's a simple mathematical formula, an algorithm. You start with a 0 and then a 1 and then another 1. And then you add the previous number to the current number, like 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, right? And you can establish the sequence. And this produces a Fibonacci sequence. And it also produces a ratio. You start dividing the previous number by the next number, and you get a ratio that approaches 1.618, etc., down the line. And this ratio is called the golden ratio, and you can make shapes out of it, called the golden rectangle. And this is what this is how it looks if you graph it out. You have the spiral, and you also have that produces a rectangle. And this rectangle, this golden rectangle, has been used in construction throughout human history, because it's considered aesthetically beautiful, right? It's used all over the place by human designers, in Parthenon and Greek buildings. It's also used in living things. Here's an egg is based on the golden ratio, how it's set up. And it's in pine cones, it's in flowers, it's in all kinds of plants. There's a cross-section of a worm right there. It's all based on the golden ratio and the Fibonacci series. It's in shells, it's in all kinds of different kinds of plants. Again, it's even in some galaxies. You can see this ratio. And so you're like, well, and there's also fractals. Fractals are, in nature, are based on this golden ratio and this Fibonacci sequence. Anybody knows what this is? This is computer generated, right? Well, you think it's computer generated until you see it. Now, this is not computer generated. This is a living thing. You know what it is? Broccoli, right? This is a Romanesque broccoli. And that's like, this is all based on fractals and the Fibonacci series as well. So it's all over the place. And the human body is based on the Fibonacci series. The ratio, all kinds of ratios of the human body are all based on the same number sequence. You see the ratio in your hand, your fist, your ear, your face from the side, your face from the front, or at least the ideals of beauty on the face or the body in general, all based on this ratio, this numerical sequence, the ratio of your hand to your arm. So like, where did this come from and why is it there? If there's any practical significance to it. And I'm not the only one who kind of finds this stuff mysterious. It's like, why is math work for the universe? Why can we predict stuff based on mathematics? And so this late mathematician and physicist and Nobel laureate, Eugene Wigner, and he wrote this paper, a widely quoted paper, and he says, the enormous usefulness of mathematics is something bordering on the mysterious. There is no rational explanation for it. The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of laws of physics is a wonderful gift with which we neither understand nor deserve. Because the reason why this is such a mystery is because the universe doesn't have to be like it currently is. All the parameters could have been different, and it didn't have to make rational sense or mathematical sense. Whoever made the universe or whatever made it, even if you're an atheist, it doesn't seem reasonable that it should have ended up so that we could understand it so rationally like this, like we do. And Einstein even noted this. He wrote in a letter to a friend, he says, you may find it strange that I consider the comprehensibility of the world a miracle or an eternal mystery. One should expect a chaotic world. If you don't believe in a designer that made it, you should expect chaos, not order and predictability based on mathematical language, which cannot be in any way grasped through thought. That's what you should expect from a universe that came about through random chance. The success of science presupposes an order in the objective world of a high degree, one which has no a priori right to expect. That is the miracle which grows increasingly persuasive with increasing development of knowledge. So he describes the predictability of the language of the universe as a miracle, right? Even though he himself is atheistic. He doesn't believe in God, but he doesn't understand how this can be if God doesn't exist. There's also mechanical miracles, like a feather. How in the world do you get a feather that works like Velcro with hooks and grooves, right? The hooks on the feather slide into the grooves just right, and that's why the bird preens the feathers to line them all up. Now, why aren't the feathers just rigid? Well, if they were rigid and you whacked your wing on something and you broke one of them, you couldn't just preen it back into place. So preening, or the way the feather is set up, allows it to be give and take. Like it allows it to open up if it hits something, and then you can preen it or zip it back together, right? It's really handy how it works. But how do you just come up with that randomly through slow, gradual changes? A feather has to be very precise for this hook and latch mechanism to work. Otherwise, you can't just gradually approach this through trial and error. Otherwise, it's just you got one little piece that works and the rest of it doesn't. It just doesn't make sense that this can be a slow, gradual process. It's so intricate that it's hard to explain. The usual explanation is that it evolved from scales, from reptilian scales, and that these scales grew over time and turned into feathers. But no one describes how that can happen in detail. And it doesn't seem reasonable that it could through a slow, gradual, non-directed process of random mutation natural selection. Same thing with other creatures like the bombardier beetle. This bombardier beetle shoots this kind of rocket fuel out of its backside, and it's about 212 degrees centigrade, so it can cook other little ants and stuff that try to attack it, and it can aim it. It has a double-barrel cannon, and it can rotate it all around and aim it at different things that come after it. And it's set up, here's a little video clip just so you know how powerful this thing is. Let's see if I can get it playing.
It can create a chemical reaction within its body so violent that boiling caustic liquid explodes out of its abdomen. By pulsing the jet 500 times a second, it keeps its rear end just cool enough to prevent it being cooked.
As you're the bombardier beetle and you're the very first one to come up with this, and you didn't get it quite right, you didn't get that pulsing properly, well, you got cooked. No more bombardier beetle, right? You just cooked yourself and boom, you're gone. And well, what happens to the next generation? Well, you just don't have one, right? So how do you evolve this thing slowly? Because in order to mix this rocket fuel, you have to have chambers to keep the fuel types separate. And then when they mix together, then they explode. And then they have to explode in a pulsating fashion, otherwise it blows the thing up, right? So how in the world can you do that gradually? You know, mixing these hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone together so that you don't blow yourself up. And then how do you learn how to aim the concoction slowly and gradually? All these things seem to suggest a very serious designer, not just a random process of these things coming together. Very hard to explain by just random mutation natural selection, when you got all these different things that you have to come up with in order to have a functional benefit to this process. Over time, you also got sea creatures that are delicately, geometrically balanced to function in that way, that are kind of artistic in a way. This, of course, this particular one was designed by humans, make this on a microscopic scale. But then how do you, not only do you have form, but you have function that look geometrical like viruses. Viruses have these geometric look to them. They almost look like alien spaceships. Some types of viruses, like bacteriophages, look like this. And how do you explain that by just a random process that put all these dozens and dozens of parts together just right so that the virus can function? And here's a little video of it coming together. There's no sound to this video. Here's a motor that attaches to the main container for the virus. The motor takes about 300 feet equivalent like of a fishing line, and the motor itself drives the fishing line into a thing the size of a coffee cup, relatively speaking, 300 feet of fishing line into a coffee cup. And it drives it in there with extreme force, about the same force as an engine for a Formula One race car. Packs it in there really tight, boom, and they're high pressure. And then all these other parts come and assemble onto the virus to form the full functioning structure of the virus. These are surface proteins that are coming and assembling onto the surface of the virus to hold it together. I mean, it's under high pressure, so it has to have some sort of high pressure container to hold it on there. And there's different types of proteins that do this, and these are the names of them, not that it matters. They just have different shapes and different functions. Then you have to, here's the inside of the virus where all the DNA is packaged inside the virus. And then the head itself, once you got the DNA there, it has attached to the tail. And the tail has these different types of fibers on it that have their own different types of function. And they all have to be very precisely attached, otherwise they don't work. And you don't have a functioning virus at all. The whisker fibers and There's different components to the tail fibers for this virus. And after they're all attached, then it can, a long tail fiber, yeah, and then you got the GP63 attachment proteins for it. That attaches them, and then they dissolve off, and then it's a complete assembly phase. So, next video. No, this is a separate bacteriophage, like a spaceship. Here's a video of how it works. So they go around in solution and they find bacteria to attack. And they attach themselves to the bacterium like a lunar probe or something. Insert their, boom, inject, like a needle, injecting their DNA into the bacterium. The DNA goes in there and it inserts itself into the host DNA. And then it makes copies of itself to make more viruses. Now you're like, well, this is evil, right? These things destroying the poor, helpless bacteriophage. But let me tell you, without these viruses, especially bacteriophages, we as humans would not be able to live on this planet because viruses clean out rivers and lakes and waste and make them, like the Ganges River historically has been considered a healthy river, but it's one of the most polluted rivers in the world. The reason why it's considered healthy and you can drink it and not get sick is because of these bacteriophages. There's trillions and trillions of them in that river. And also every day, just on your hands and things that you absorb through your skin and your intestines, you absorb, let's see, several billion viruses a day. And there's more, your body, the number of cells in your body is about 43% human. The rest of the cells in your body are alien, either bacteria or viruses. And there's about 10 times more viruses than there are bacteria. There's at least 38 trillion bacteria in your body, and there's 380 trillion viruses in your body right now, without which you wouldn't be healthy and you couldn't live. The viruses keep in balance the bacteria in your body. And they also prevent other infectious organisms from attacking your body. So without also within the genome, and this is outside of my usual discussion, but within your genome, you're about 48% non-viral. The rest of your genome it looks like viral elements in your genome. Your human genome is mostly viral, which is interesting too because it suggests, and they do a lot of important functions. The viruses in your genome are responsible for embryogenesis, in other words, controlling yourself from the egg all the way till birth, the whole embryogenesis process, as well as brain development is based on viral elements that control the function and formation of you. So this is really kind of, without them you wouldn't be able to live. And so they look highly designed. They didn't just evolve. And here's another little interesting creature. It's called a pistol shrimp. And it can snap its pistol claw, and it can shoot a cavitation bubble at 60 miles an hour. And it is 5,000 degrees centigrade in heat for a brief instant. And it shoots its prey and then knocks it out and then goes and eats it, right? And so how do you develop something like that slowly? Because either you can create a cavitation bubble by pinching fast enough, or you don't. Cavitation, you can't just pinch slowly and make a small cavitation bubble. You either have it or you don't. And you can't evolve that slowly. And here's a video clip. It's just a really interesting creature.
Far from being quiet, the ocean is filled with a cacophony of animal noise that can even disrupt the sonic transmissions of submarines. Most of the din is made by a surprisingly insignificant creature, the pistol shrimp. By snapping its claws, it can not only make communication sounds, but something far deadlier. These shrimps are its prey. It deals a knockout blow from a distance by using its claw as a sonic weapon. First, its claw is cocked like a pistol, then fired. The effect is literally stunning. As the claw snaps shut, it fires a blast of bubbles. Incredibly, as the bubbles collapse, they momentarily reach the temperature of the sun. This implosion causes a shockwave that stuns.
So that's pretty impressive, to me at least. I was like, how do you have all that stuff slowly? Same thing for a woodpecker. And when a woodpecker, it hears the bug inside the tree, and so it has to get at it quickly, because if you peck slowly, first of all, your bug is going to get away, right? So you have to peck quickly to get in there. And so it pecks, and with tremendous force. It pecks with the force of like a .22 bullet hitting the tree. Well, in order to peck that hard without your head exploding, you have to peck very precisely. So the woodpecker opens its eyes, it zeroes in on exactly where it's going to peck, then it closes its eyes and then pecks. Because if it left its eyes open, its eyeballs would fly out, right? No more woodpecker. Also, if it pecked slightly crooked, its head would blow up. Splat, no more woodpecker, right? So it has to do all these things very precisely, and its brain is padded so that to impact, it's padded so it won't blow up. So all these things are specifically designed so it can peck with speed to catch that little, and then its tongue has these little barbs on it so that it can stick it in there, stick it through the grub or whatever it is and pull it out. Right? If it has a slick tongue, you can peck all you want and get in there and it's just nothing, right? So he has all these really special features to be able to do this. Also, his tongue is long. It doesn't just go straight out of its mouth. No, it goes backwards, around its head, all the way around, back down, and then back out. So in order to give it extra length, I guess. So anyway, all these things are specially designed for this woodpecker to do what it does. And there's a lot more features about this that I don't have time to go into, but basically, how do you get all this thing slowly? You know, gradually process. Either you got it or you don't. And, how do you evolve in a specific direction until you get something beneficial? Same thing with a giraffe. A giraffe has this giant long neck, and it has a huge heart, this big, around. And the heart has to pump really high pressure blood pressure to get the blood to the brain. So it goes boom, 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 huge pressure to get the blood all the way up that neck to the brain. But then it has to drink, right? So when it goes down to drink, then all of a sudden the heart's still punching high blood pressure, but the head is now way down at the feet, right? So the pressure of the blood would blow out the brain. Any normal brain, it would just go no more giraffe. Kaboom, right? So the giraffe has a special structure in back of its brain that is like a sponge. So when he puts his head down and the blood pressure comes pouring down his neck all of a sudden, kabam, right? Well, it doesn't hit his brain. It hits that sponge, which absorbs the pressure and goes and fills up, absorbs the pressure and protects the brain from getting exploded, right? So how do you get that slowly? I mean, I guess you could roll this thing behind your brain slowly, gradually as your neck got longer, but no other creature has that. How did it invent this structure to grow? You'd have to have the structure first, I guess, before you grew the long neck. But there's all kinds of competing factors here that it's hard to explain through a gradual process. The universe also has a few challenging details itself that a lot of smart people like Newton thought that was designed. Isaac Newton actually wrote more about religion than he did about science or mathematics, but no one really studies that very much anymore. He said, the most beautiful system of the sun, the planets, and the comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Well, since Newton comes along, everybody thinks he's crazy. Except recently, there's been some studies on the fine-tuned features of the universe, and here's Leonard Susskind, he's a theoretical physicist from Stanford, talking about some of the interesting fine-tuned features of the universe necessary for life to exist here. And he's also an atheist. As you're listening to this, remember, he's an atheist. So how does he wrap his mind around this? So here he goes.
The general view of this, for most physicists, is that these fine-tunings are largely accidental, that the constants of nature are determined by some mathematical principles which have nothing whatever to do with our existence. Impersonal, mathematical, and we were just incredibly lucky that that mathematics happened to give rise to a universe with all this kind of fine-tuning.
For a
just
while, it
precisely
was
so.
possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant. And when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything gets bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question. But the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the anthropic scientists did not want to entertain.
So he still doesn't accept the idea of a designer. The cosmological constant is basically everything in the universe is flying apart from each other. All the galaxies are flying away from each other. All the stars are flying away from each other. But they have to fly away at a very precise speed. Otherwise, if they fly away too fast, the universe expands too rapidly and you don't get heavy metals or heavy elements to form properly enough, and you don't get complex life. If you don't have things flying away fast enough, slightly too slow, then everything will collapse back down on itself, and our universe wouldn't be at this point in time. It wouldn't exist. It'd collapse back down on itself before complex life could be formed or maintained. And so the cosmological constant has to be very precise in order to maintain that balance. And he says, well, that's the most precise one. Now we know more precise ones that are vastly more precise than that. Because we know that the entropy of the universe the beginning state of the universe had to be very precise, an entropic state like charging a battery. It had to be so precise, it had to be precise to 1 part in 10 to the power of 123. So that's like if you had to write down that number, you'd write 0.00000 before you get to a 1. You'd have to write 40,000 zeros on every atom in the universe to write that number down, right? So that's the precision of the original entropy of the universe. So I just get distracted a little bit, but even living things are more precise than that. So why do scientists, or most scientists, reject the seemingly obvious conclusion of design in nature? What's the real reason for this? Why doesn't Leonard Susskind just accept this? Because he proposes, what's his answer? Well, he says there's basically infinite numbers of universes, and that's why our universe happened to turn out right by random chance, instead of accepting a designer. So Dean Kenyon, he wrote this book called Biochemical Predestination, an old book, 1969, in biologist at San Francisco State University. He was considered a biochemical evolutionary expert, but then he changed his mind and recognized design, and he recanted his previous position. So what is his explanation for why scientists usually reject a design in the universe or in living things?
Do many of your colleagues support your new position? If not, why not?
Actually, very few have been supportive of my new views on origin of life and the development of the species. I think a rather larger number of my faculty colleagues, however, are willing to allow me to express these new views in class. But the majority, though, are unhappy on both counts, I would say. And as to why they hold this view, I don't think there's a simple answer to this. Some of the possibilities are that the Darwinian way of thinking is such a deeply ingrained habit of thought. It's been prevalent for such a long time, and it has so many implications for the whole of the biological sciences. Another aspect tied to that, of course, is how graduate students are socialized as they go through their program and hear only the Darwinian story of origins. And I think my colleagues, in general, those who are opposed to this, are very reluctant to take time to examine this issue, and maybe they realize the large reorientation of thought that would be required if they were to change their views.
So basically, they've been trained their whole lives to think this way. So it's very difficult for them to change their mind once they have held on to an idea for pretty much their entire lives into their professional career. And you're trained as a scientist to be rational. You can't think of some sort of supernatural being or angel or anything messing with your experiment. And so you're trained not to even think along those lines ever. And so here, Frederick Hoyle, he's the one who, he didn't believe in the Big Bang. He didn't believe he believed in an eternal universe that was static. It always is like it is and it always was for eternity past. And so when the idea of a Big Bang and an origin or a beginning to the universe came out, he kind of wanted to deride this idea, and he said, oh, you guys, you believe in that Big Bang. But the term stuck. But it started with him. The Big Bang name for it came from Frederick Hoyle. And Chandrika Rick Ramsing, he's a mathematician, physicist, and they wrote this book, Evolution from Space. And in this book, they have some interesting concepts or ideas. They said, from the very beginning of this book, we have emphasized the enormous informational content of even the simplest of living systems. The information cannot, in our view, be generated by what are often called natural processes, as for instance through meteorological or chemical processes. Information was also needed. We have argued that the requisite information came from an intelligence. And then later on, Rick Ramsey personally wrote, he says, it was quite a shock. From my earliest training as a scientist, I was very strongly brainwashed to believe that science cannot be consistent with any kind of deliberate creation. That notion has had to be very painfully shed. I am quite uncomfortable in this situation, the state of mind I now find myself in, but there is no logical way out of it. I now find myself driven to this position by logic. There is no other way in which we can understand the precise ordering of the chemicals of life except to invoke creations on a cosmic scale. We were hoping as scientists that there would be a way around our conclusion, but there isn't. And their conclusion on that one, they've changed their mind since. They waffle back and forth a lot. But on this particular one, he said there must be a God, right? So what's the best counter-argument? If the nature of the universe and of living things even drive you to the logical, inescapable conclusion that there's a God, or at least a God-like intelligence and power in the universe, what is the argument left for scientists to deny this, if you're looking for something to deny the existence of God or intelligence? Well, we're both in a hard place. Christians are in a difficult place because we believe in a God who's eternal and is infinite in power and knowledge. Can you understand that? How that can be, how God can make something from nothing? I cannot understand. That's a mystery, right? God is by definition a mystery. Now, on the other hand, those who deny God, they have their own mystery. They have to explain how everything can come from nothing, right? Can you explain how everything can come from nothing? Well, that's what they believe. They can't explain it any better than I can. And so why do I pick God versus this other mystery? How do you know which mystery to pick? Well, I was like, there's a story that Hawking told about another physicist who had given a lecture. And at the end of the lecture, an American Indian lady stood up in the back of the room and said, "You're crazy. The world and the universe did not get made like you said." And he says, well, so he plays along. He says, well, how did it get made? And she says, well, it was built on the back of a turtle. So he's playing along some more. He thought he'd have some fun with this lady. And he says, well, what's the turtle standing on? And he says, young man, you don't know anything. It's turtles all the way down, right? And so I kind of like that idea because, look, I don't know. I can't explain God, and I can't explain something coming from nothing. But at least I can tell which way the turtles are going. Are they going up or down? Right? At least I can tell my little section of what I can understand as which way those turtles are going. And maybe that will lead me to the correct mystery that is actually the right answer to the question. And so I'm just looking at the turtles, and so are they. So they think it's turtles all the way up. I think it's turtles all the way down. So here's Stephen Hawking. He's considered by many the most brilliant physicists of the modern age. And this is what he wrote in his book, The Grand Design, in 2010. He says, because there is a law, such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. But he just contradicted himself, right? He says, because there is a law, such as gravity, that's something, right? The universe will create itself out of nothing. That's like, you just said there was something, because there is a law such as gravity. And he says, so he's already contradicted himself. He says, spontaneous creation is the reason why there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue torch paper and set the universe going. And this is basis of M theory, which is quantum theory. And M doesn't really stand for anything. You could say mother or magic or whatever. It doesn't really stand for anything, except it's trying to unify quantum theories into one unified theory. So he goes on. He says, according to M theory, ours is not the only universe. Instead, M theory predicts that there is a great many of universes out there created out of nothing. Their creation does not require intervention of some supernatural being or God. Rather, these multiple universes arrive naturally from physical law. Again, from nothing, from physical law, right? So what he's basically saying is that in quantum theory, there's this giant lake, a quantum lake of potential. And the lake is bubbling, bubble, 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 bubble. And it's like a giant quantum computer that's eternal and infinite. And it's bubbling. And each of the bubbles is a universe that pops out of the lake, like a soda lake, that's like Dr. Pepper Lake. And it's bubbling. And each of the bubbles that pops is a universe, right? But he's starting with a quantum computer that's eternal and infinite and can make anything it wants. You know, statistics don't really matter. At this point, science is out the window. It's like anything it wants, except it can't judge you, right? That's the only difference. It can't judge you like a God can, but it can do everything else a God can do. So Richard Dawkins really liked this. He said, Darwinism kicked God out of biology, but physics remained more uncertain. Hawking is now administering the coup de grace, kicking God out of physics as well as biology, right? Except there's a problem. Sir Roger Penrose, he's a famous theoretical physicist, Nobel Prize winner as well. He's like, unlike quantum mechanics, M theory enjoys no observational support whatsoever. In other words, it's just a philosophical position. It's not science. It's just something that you dreamt up that you want to be true in order to avoid some conclusion that you don't want to be true, right? So he says it's based rather on beauty or elegance of the underlying math that you want to be true. But math by itself is not science. So here's another interesting guy. This is Lawrence Krauss. In 2012, he's an American theoretical physicist and cosmologist. He wrote A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss. Same argument, multiple universes creating ours by random chance because there's essentially an infinite number of universes, and ours just came out right. So Richard Dawkins, again, very impressed by this. He says, even the last remaining trump card of the theologian, why there is something rather than nothing, shrivels up before your eyes as you read these pages. If on the origins of species was biology's deadliest blow to the supernatural, we may come to see a universe from nothing as equivalent from cosmology. So how did these guys come to this conclusion that you can pop something from nothing? Well, here's an interesting argument, and I really like this next guy. He's a physicist, Michael Kiko, and he presents the argument in plain English, and it's a very interesting argument.
And so the universe could essentially be nothingness, which was unstable, and created a soap bubble. Now you may say to yourself, well, that can't be right, because that violates the conservation of matter and energy. How can you create a universe from nothing? Well, if you calculate the total matter of the universe, it is positive. If you calculate the total energy of the universe, it is negative because of gravity. Gravity has negative energy. When you add the two together, what do you get? 0. So it takes no energy to create a universe. Universes are for free. A universe is a free lunch. And then you may say to yourself, well, that can't be right, because positive and negative charges don't cancel out. Therefore, how can the universe be made out of nothing? Well, if you calculate the total amount of positive charge in the universe and calculate the total amount of negative charge in the universe, and you add it up, what do you get? 0. The universe has 0 charge. Well, what about spin? Galaxies spin, right? But they spin in all directions. If you add up all the spins of the galaxies, what do you get? 0. So in other words, the universe has 0 spin, 0 charge, and 0 matter energy content. In other words, the universe is for free.
There's only one thing he forgot. The universe has low entropy. And the original state of the universe had to have extremely low, in other words, extremely high precision. Where do you get that kind of information to produce extremely high precision for the universe in order to make everything else add up to 0? The spin, the gravity, all these other things add up to 0. And so again, Roger Penrose points this out. He says, the free lunch universe has an information problem. He says, there's 0 energy Big Bang, and he says, except extremely low entropy. In other words, extremely high order and precision. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy can only increase within a closed system toward a maximum entropy. In other words, maximum perfectly diffused energy throughout the universe. That's where we're headed. In other words, nothing can exist in that state. You have to start with extremely low entropy. So the original precision of the universe, this atom has to go there, that molecule has to go there, this subatomic molecule has to go there, precisely placed. How does that happen? The precision had to be precise. Again, 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123, like I told you before, where you write zeros, 40,000 zeros on every atom in the universe to write this number down. It says, these observations imply that the early universe was in a very low entropic state, which shows that the initial conditions were extremely finely tuned, and that is not explained by anybody. The reasons why this finely tuned are not explained by the general relativity or the standard model, adding inflation, where somehow gravity is turned backward, to the model does not cure this fine-tuning problem. In other words, no physicist can explain where the fine-tuning came from, where the information content of the original universe came from, except if you invoke an infinite number of eternal universes, or in an infinite number of universes in an eternal quantum computer. So what about getting something from nothing? Why is this such a basic philosophical concept for most scientists living today? And is it really science? Here's Richard Dawkins again trying to explain why getting something for free from nothing is so basic to science today.
I'm not so at ease with that as you seem to be, because it does seem to me that if there is a supernatural, superhuman intelligence that worked it all out, in a way that undermines the entire scientific enterprise, because we are, maybe an evolutionary biologist feels this more strongly, the whole enterprise of evolutionary biology is to explain how you get prodigious complexity and design from virtually nothing. I mean, we hand over to physicists when we can go beyond the virtually nothing to the absolutely nothing.
So he's trying to get it down to absolutely nothing, basically, and that's why everybody laughs, because no one really understands that. It's just irrational.
If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever.
You think?
He would have to be the physicist to end all physicists. I don't care if he then withdraws. He needs an explanation in his own right. And it seems to me that the noble scientific enterprise is to start from as near nothing as you can get.
So it's noble to say that God can't exist unless you can explain his origin. But you're perfectly fine with a eternal, infinite quantum computer existing, having no beginning of days or end of life. You have no problem with that, making gazillions of universes all the time. And you have no problem explaining that does not have an origin. But as soon as you talk about God being eternal and not having a beginning or end, then all of a sudden you're being irrational. It's like, why is that? Why is that more irrational than when you're suggesting about this eternal quantum computer that can make anything it wants except it can't give you moral judgment? So it basically boils down to one argument: just don't call it God. So here's a very interesting exchange between Lawrence Krauss, who wrote that book, A Universe from Nothing, and a radio host who happens to be a Christian radio host. And he asked him a series of interesting questions about his position. He says, do you see any evidence for purpose in the universe? He says, well, maybe I would if the stars all lined up and said, hey, Lawrence, this is God. I just thought I'd stop by to say hi. Maybe I would believe if that happened, if the stars all lined up for a message from God. And then Brierley says, actually, no. That wouldn't be evidence for God from your multi-universe view. If there are an infinite number of universes existing for an infinite amount of time, then anything can happen no matter how unlikely it is. Therefore, no evidence could convince you that God exists, since the unobservable, untestable, eternal multiverse can make anything it wants, including stars lining up saying, hey, Lawrence, this is God, right? That would not be evidence of God. Do you see where I'm going? So it's like two-headed cows. Nothing should surprise you. Two-headed cows, 10-headed cows, angels dancing on the head of a pin, Arnold Schwarzenegger winning the California lottery 10 times in a row. Some universe, it's bound to happen by random chance, given the multi-universe view, right? And so he says this should not be evidence for you for the existence of God, given your perspective, because you kind of rule that out by definition. And so what is Lawrence going to say in response to this? And occasionally, physicists become honest. And this is a very interesting response from Krauss. He says, that's a true statement. It's like, what? He said, that's a true statement. He says, you talk about this God of love and everything else, but somehow, if you don't believe in him, you don't get any of the benefits. So you have to believe. And then if you do anything wrong, you're going to be judged for it. I don't want to be judged by God, and that's the bottom line. Right? That's the bottom line. It has nothing to do with science or physics or rational thought or anything. It's just, I don't want to be judged by God, so I'm going to deny him, and that's the bottom line. Right? It's a matter of desire and personal philosophy. It has nothing at all to do with the weight of evidence. It reminds me a lot of something I read a few years ago from Thomas Huxley, actually. He said, I think it says Aldous Huxley, Ends and Means. He wrote this book in 1937. He said, I had motive for not wanting the world to have meaning, consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find reasons for my assumption. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with the problem of metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do. or why his friends should not seize political power and govern in the way that they find most advantageous to themselves. For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, a philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from certain political and economic systems and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom, and we objected to the political and economic system because it was unjust. The supporters of these systems claimed that in some way they embodied the meaning, a Christian meaning they insisted of the world. There was one admirably simple method of computing these people and at the same time justifying ourselves in our political and erotical revolt. We could deny that the world had any meaning whatsoever, right? And then they were free. It's a strive for personal freedom outside of anybody else having moral judgment over you, right? That's the bottom line. That's why, and by the way, Lawrence Krauss, this last year, the same guy who said that that's the bottom line, he just lost his position at his university because of multiple women accusing him of sexual harassment.
They are so close-minded, yes. and it really, I got the feeling from the movie that it's really not about science.
No, it's about them.
It's anti-God. They cannot allow God to be a part of anything.
Right, because if there's a God, then they might be judged. If there's a God who holds you accountable for your actions, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, I'm going to be the first to agree, I'm in a lot of trouble too. But there's a lot, but they cannot admit that there's a possibility of sin or a possibility of morality, and they can't agree on this basic thing. If man is just a speck of dust struck by lightning and then turned into a human being, then he has no moral responsibility. If we're all children of God, we have some moral responsibility because we all have some little piece of God in us. That scares them to death. Okay.
Now, it should scare you to death too, and me too. But the reason why shouldn't be scared is because as Christians, the judgment is given in favor of the saints, right? And this is a problem for me because I was like, I don't really naturally consider myself very saintly. But look at who God describes as saints in the Bible. They weren't very saintly either. I mean, David was about as wormy as he gets, and yet he's like a friend of God, right? So that gives me hope. I was like, well, man, if David could be a friend of God, maybe I can be a friend of God too. And then judgment is given in favor of those who are friends of God. It matters who you're friends with, right? It all matters who you know. If you know Jesus, you have the Father. And if you have the Father, you have life, right? And judgment is going to be given in your favor, so judgment is a good thing in that situation. The only reason why judgment wouldn't be a good thing is if you desperately cling to the Bible calls it vomit, the dog who goes back to its vomit, right? If you experience Christ and you want to live your same old life, it's like a dog going back to its vomit. Why would you want to do that, right? And that's the only thing. If you're attracted to that life, it's like God cannot help you anymore at that time. If you just totally reject the call of His Spirit, offering you beautiful things and a beautiful new life and power through Christ to overcome your old life, why in the world would you want to deliberately cling to that? And so, as a Christian, we're offered hope to escape this world of pain and suffering and driving ourselves to insanity and open ourselves up to a beautiful promise of a hopeful future. And so I'd like to just close with this funny little video that kind of sums it up for me anyway.
Hello, I'm Creation.
And I am the theory of evolution. Why are you so happy?
Oh, are you kidding? Because I have hope.
Hope?
Mm-hmm. You know, and the assurance that I have a purpose.
A purpose?
Mm-hmm. You can have one too, you know.
Don't want one.
What are you talking about? Everybody wants to have a purpose.
That's not true. Some people want to hold to the unproven fact that we're nothing more than a bunch of protoplasmic goo that evolved over billions of years and will end up as cosmic garbage, therefore serving no one or no purpose at all.
No hope or purpose?
Right.
That's so sad.
So, if that's what you want, God can't really argue with you, ultimately, and He's going to give you what you want in the end. The Christian's going to get what the Christian wants, eternal time with God. And those who deny Christ and say, this is the bottom line, I don't want to be judged, in favor or otherwise, they're going to get what they want. And because just God cannot argue with you after a certain point. He can give you all the evidence in the world saying, even if I raise somebody from the dead, they're not going to believe. The only reason they're not going to believe is because they're determined not to believe. They have deliberately chosen to reject the evidence and go with what they feel that they want. And what they want is no judgment, right? And so for me, I was like, hey, my life here, even the best that I can imagine isn't that great. It's really painful, this world. And certainly I've done my own share of causing my own problems. So I want to escape that, if at all possible. And there's only one way out. And God has offered us that way through Christ. And if we accept Christ, we have a brilliant future ahead of us. And there's lots of evidence ahead that I'm going to go over with you tomorrow on reasons why we should accept this. Not just the offer is fantastic, but that the reality of the offer is actually based on solid evidence. So I'd like to open it up. Maybe we have a few questions tonight, just in case you're thinking about something, because tomorrow for the main church service, there's no time for questions. In the afternoon, there'll be some more time. But if you have any questions so far, please raise your hand. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. But haven't figured out everything, but this is one of my favorite topics to think about. So if you have anything that I should think about, yeah.
Do you have an opinion about aliens from other galaxies?
Visiting Earth? Yes. Oh, yeah. I think angels visit all the time, but I wouldn't call them aliens. But I do. We were just reading a book about evidence for angel visitations. For some strange reason, the angels always let you know that they're angels after they disappear. They like suddenly disappear. Oh, that was an angel, right? And I don't know why they do that. They don't ever reveal themselves as angels very often. But as far as other created worlds, Ellen White talks about that. And the Bible also hints at that because it says that the sons of God in Job sang together when our world was made. So where do these other sons of God live? And we're told that that each one of those planets, and you know there's over 2 trillion universes in the visible, not universe, 2 trillion visible galaxies in the universe that's visible with the Hubble telescope and radio telescopes as well. And if there's only one world in every galaxy, that's a whole lot of worlds, right? And every one of those worlds, has a tree of knowledge of good and evil on it. Every one of them does. And ours is the only stupid planet that fell for that garbage. So anyway, I do think there's tons of other worlds all around the universe. And ours is right now the center of focus because it's the parable of the lost sheep. He left the 90 and 9 and came here. I think that was a huge understatement. He left like the 1,000,000,009 to come here, and now the whole universe is looking at us to see if we'll accept this fantastic gift that we've been given. So, yeah, I believe in aliens, but I think that they're spectacular aliens. So, anyway, yes. Oh, yeah, because there's creatures that have gone extinct. More than 90% of the creatures that were on the planet before the flood are gone, right? So and also of the animals that are still living, like, the 30 trillion viruses in your body, more than half of those are not identified. We just know that they're there based on DNA fragments that we don't know where they came from. So there's a lot of creatures living right now that we don't know anything about. Yeah.
I suppose that could be the dangerous thing about antiviral drugs. If we start killing viruses that we need, we're in trouble.
Right, yeah, you could wipe out the wrong thing, right? So, yeah, you have to be careful. Any kind of medication has side effects, pretty much. I'll get in that a little bit tomorrow as well, yeah.
Just curious, the Fibonacci numbers, the Fibonacci sequence is absolutely amazing. It seems very convincing and logical. I can't remember the arguments, but I've heard some pushback against using that. Have you encountered any of those?
I have, because a lot of times they'll say, well, it's not precise. It's not exactly the Fibonacci. But it's eerily similar in so many different places. You're like, well, yeah, if you carried out 5 decimal places or whatever, it's not always precise. The forearm to the hand is not exactly perfectly Fibonacci, but it's very close. You're like, how is it so close to Fibonacci? And that's what we consider beautiful, right? It's a naturally beautiful pattern or symmetry there. And I was like, and it's not just in one place, it's all over the place. And most people, most physicists and even biologists accept that it really is, and that there really isn't a good explanation for why it's that way. Except they argue that symmetry helps reproduction. And I was like, well, because it's a more attractive mate or whatever. I was like, so the beetle says, well, that's a very attractive Fibonacci beetle over there. So I'm not really convinced by that, but anyway.
I thought it was interesting when you were showing the video of the bombardier beetle. When that chemical comes out, you said it was 212 or 216 degrees, and it also, it looked like it splashed the beetle. So there's something in the beetle that is able to resist that temperature for however long it's splashed by.
Well, it didn't get a direct blast. If it splashed the beetle directly, enough of it got on it, it would cook the beetle as well. But it has an exoskeleton that's able to diffuse it a little bit when it hits its legs a little bit. But it's not like a full blast, because the ant also has an exoskeleton, but it has a full blast on the ant, and the ant gets cooked. It dies. So anyway, yeah, you have to be careful with the bombardier beetle. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. But yeah, in short, I think I disagree with some people, some Adventists who've written books on dinosaurs and stuff before the flood. I do think that the humans before the flood were a lot smarter than us and lived a lot longer, but I don't think they had necessarily the power of genetic manipulation that some people have ascribed to them. I think that the dinosaurs were originally made like lions, who then degenerated and became carnivores. Because lions originally, were told in the Bible, ate straw like an ox, right? But eating a vegetarian diet, and we have real life examples of this, of going from vegetarian to carnivorous. And when you go from vegetarian to carnivorous, your enzymes and your gut become simpler. It's more complex to be a vegetarian. You have to require more enzymes and a more complex digestive system to be an effective vegetarian. Whereas if you go carnivorous, all that goes away because you don't need the complexities to digest the carnivorous diet. And so I think that's what happened with dinosaurs. They were initially vegetarian. And also some apes with the big long canine teeth, the huge thing, they're vegetarian, right? So just because you have vicious teeth doesn't mean you're a meat eater. And so, there may be plants or something before the flood that required vicious teeth to get into them. Who knows? But I think it all started out vegetarian, and that these creatures devolved over time. Devolution is a real process. You can start complex and easily go downhill. It's very easy to break Humpty Dumpty. Putting him back together again, that's a whole other problem, right? And so, yeah, I'll talk more about dinosaurs tomorrow, but there's some really interesting things about dinosaurs that strongly indicate they were recently created. So, anybody else? All right, thank you. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hope you one more. Go ahead. Stars? No, that's a whole different topic. Now, again, not everybody agrees with me in the church, but if you look at Job, it says, again, all the sons of God sang together at the creation of our world, right? So I believe that the universe pre-existed the creation of our planet, and that when Moses is writing Genesis, he's writing it from an earthbound perspective, as he's given a vision of the creation of our world. And so when he says the sun, moon, and stars, he says, and the stars also, like a side comment. By the way, if you're confused about who made the stars, it was God. He made the stars also. But it doesn't necessarily suggest or demand that it was created within that 7 days, right? It suggests, especially if you read the Bible as a whole, especially Job in particular, and even some of Revelation, it suggests that the universe pre-existed the creation of our world. And our world was created recently, within less than 10,000 years ago, probably a little over 6,000 years. But that's just our planet and just life on our planet. The basic building blocks of our world, like the water and the rocks and stuff, they could be billions of years old too. But the complexity of the planet necessary to support complex life, that's young. And I'll talk about that as well. It's life itself. I'm like a young life creationist, not a young earth creationist. There's, to me, a significant difference between those two views. So that's my own view. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Dexter, would you have a closing prayer for us?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for not just giving us a nice fairy tale story in the Bible, but showing us that it's actually true. It makes a huge difference for how hopeful we can live our lives and what a bright future we can look forward to with confidence, that you really do love us and care for us and have provided for us a hopeful life here and now, as well as a bright future to come. And we thank you for giving your Son to give us this gift. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Home, get a good night's rest, let your brain relax so you can absorb more of this good stuff tomorrow morning. The doctor will speak to us again for the church service at the 11 o'clock hour. Our church service begins at 10:45. We do have a Sabbath school in the morning. It's a Bible study. We call Sabbath school 9:30. You're welcome to come to that as well. But Dr. Pitman won't speak until the church service. We'll have a fellowship meal tomorrow after our church service, and then at 2 o'clock again, Dr. Pitman will have his last presentation. Hope to see you there. Have a good night.